welcome, Mark. Thank you all for coming. Last year you published Vegan Before 6 that contained the radical proposal that if you could not only improve your own health but the planet's health by changing your diet. For the people who bought more than 1 million copies of your How to Cook Everything book, though, you were the guy who cooked and presumably ate everything. What was the reaction to the book?
Well, it debuted at #1 on the New York Times bestseller list, so I guess it did okay. The only people who gave me a hard time about VB6 were vegans, because, you know, it wasn't arch enough. But it's consistent with what I've done over the years, which is eat real food. So I think we've learned, most of us have learned, that eating real food is a good start. And I think we've learned in recent years that eating real food, especially plants, is a better continuance. And that's what VB6 is, a strategy to get more plants into your diet. How to Cook Everything is a strategy to cook real food. So they're not inconsistent.
As a New Yorker, though, did you miss egg, bacon, and cheese on a hard roll during the daytime?
Sadly, there are no hard rolls anymore. There are only things that are called hard rolls. So I was missing them long before that.
Whenever I write about the meat-vegetable divide, the conversation quickly deteriorates, and I'm reminded among my commenters of elementary school children on the playground, and the boys would be the meat eaters going over to pull the pigtails of the girls who are the vegetarians, and the conversation tends to be with the vegetarians saying things like, well, you can't actually digest meat, it just rots in your digestive system as it goes through, and the meat eaters calling the vegetarians oversensitive hippies who have poor muscle tone. Why does it get so nasty so quickly when people talk about meat or propose to eat less meat and more vegetarian?
I love that line about the meat rotting in your intestines.
I mean, it seems to me incorrect, but it is popularly held among vegetarians that in fact that's what happens. The meat just rots.
It stays there. That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. No one says, people who wear suits are whatever, and people who don't are. You don't say that to each other, but people do criticize each other's diets, and I think we believe that our diets are closely held, and we're defensive about that. I mean, I have tried. Mark called me non-dogmatic, and I think in my real true inner self, I'm quite dogmatic and hypercritical and everything else. But I think when you speak publicly, or when you try to look at what other people think or what other people believe, you have to be measured, and you have to be understanding, and you have to be tolerant, and you have to be patient. So to say, we should eat more plants doesn't seem so radical. To say meat rots in your stomach seems really radical. So we mostly, certainly those of us of a certain age, let's say the baby boomers, we really grew up all eating the same diet. I mean, we really did, because we were in this era of white bread and meat and potatoes and canned vegetables, and then later frozen vegetables and maybe microwave dinners. But it was really center of the plate meat with starch and some lousy vegetable and occasionally a salad and lots of dessert. And I think we've changed our diets at different rates, and maybe some of us are a little defensive about the old days. I don't know. It's a really good question.
Thank you. I know Mark had several questions from the university community, so I'll turn this over to him.
Yeah, I've solicited some questions from university experts and leadership. And
That's great, experts in leadership.
And I'd like to pose some of those questions. The first for Albany Dining Services. This is submitted by Steve Pierce, who's the Executive Director of University Auxiliary Services. You've written a lot about the future of large-scale and school dining and the feasibility of increasing the availability of healthy choices. Beyond offering a wider range of vegetables, a wider range of fruits, whole grains, beyond reducing sodium, reducing fat, reducing frying, what can food providers do at the institutional level that will make life better for everyone?
Great question. I even have an answer. One, don't buy any meat that's been raised with prophylactic antibiotic use. Very simple decision, and if Chipotle can do it, universities can do it. Two, source whatever is feasible locally, and that's obviously different in California than it is in upstate New York, but it could be 20%, it could be 30%.
They're doing 30
could be whatever,
currently,
that's
yep.
Great. Three, return to those farmers the stuff that's composted on campus, which should be almost everything. That's a good start.
Great, thanks. Second question. This is from the president of our university, Robert Jones, who is a leading authority on plant physiology and crop science.
Great. It's frightening.
He regrets that he can't be here tonight because he's attending an alumni event in New York City, but here's the question. In your view, what is the most promising approach we currently have at our disposal to ending world hunger? You do have an answer, because I've read the book.
I do.
And I've read your columns.
But there, you know, promising implies some level of hopefulness or optimism. So I don't know. You end world hunger by ending poverty,
right.
And this is, of all the sort of pat answers I have, which I'm sorry, I do a lot of this, so inevitably I have some pat answers. This is one of my favorite pat answers. If anyone in this room goes to the poorest place in your imagination, whatever it is, the place that you imagine to be the hungriest place on the planet, you know, it's in India or Sri Lanka or some place in Africa, whatever it might be, if any of us goes there, we're not hungry. And why are we not hungry? Because we have money. Because we have some 20s in our pocket and we have a credit card in our pocket, and we are going to find food. It might take a little while, but eventually, even if we're, you know, in the sticks, we're going to find a road, we're going to pay someone to take us to a city, we're going to go to a place and we're going to eat. So it's not that there are places where there is no food. That is not really a problem. It's that there are places, or that there are people who don't have money.
You've also written about the paradoxical efficiency of peasant farming, that it is in fact more efficient than industrial farming. I remember a column, I believe it's in the new book, and that there's a lot to learn from peasant farming. You don't.
Well, the easy statistic there is that peasant farming, which basically means all small-scale farming, and peasant I don't think is an insulting word, but if you do, we won't use it. But small-scale farming uses 30% of the planet's agricultural resources. Okay,
here.
Small-scale farming uses 30% of the world's agricultural resources to feed 70% of the population, and so-called conventional farming, that is so-called efficient farming, uses 70% of the world's agricultural resources to feed 30% of the population. So which is more efficient?
I'll ask one more question. If there are any lulls, and I doubt there will be, there are other questions that I have. But one last question is, this is from Mary Ellen Malia, the director of the Office of Environmental Sustainability on campus. What are your recommendations for integrating seasonal eating eating produce according to the seasons, into our culture, and a system that has been used to year-round abundance and the immediacy of getting any food at any time?
You know, I think that's something people in one way need to think out for themselves. It's unlikely that any of us is going to eat from a root cellar all winter, anytime soon. Or am I wrong? Which is what we'd have to do to eat here if we were going to eat seasonally. So, but I do think that there is, first of all, there's a renewed appreciation for root vegetables and for winter vegetables in general. Secondly, seasons are extendable in the Northeast and elsewhere where there's winter. So, I'm not saying we should be eating hydroponically grown hothouse tomatoes in January, but to eat arugula or collards or even broccoli in January may not be such a stretch. And I think this one is a matter of degree, that it will change slowly. No one's going to say, well, not no one, but I wouldn't say never eat a winter vegetable from California again, but I would say we probably don't need to be eating tomatoes in the middle of winter, and I would say we probably don't need to be bringing grapes or tomatoes from Chile or Peru in the middle of the winter either. I mean, maybe the start is to compromise a little bit for those people who are committed locavores and think, well, maybe local could mean 500 miles instead of 50 or 100 miles. And for those people who think they deserve to eat or are entitled to eat every single thing any day of the year, it might be to just consider seasonality a little more. How's that for non-dogmatic? That's pretty
very nice. Very non-dogmatic. Thank you.
You evolved from the
like being in a sandwich.
I guess that would make me one half of the white bread.
It's like,
you evolved from the minimalist when you were doing simple, accessible recipes for real food to somebody writing about food policy and part of a major national political debate. Sometimes when you were involved in one of the thornier debates following your column, did you long for the simpler days of a recipe of stir-fried chicken skin and dried chilies?
It's a good recipe. I never stopped. I have never stopped writing recipes. So I had that, but certainly the minimalist column was a lot easier than the opinion column. But I will also say this about the opinion column. I never got embroiled in debates. I felt like my job, and this is what was hard, I felt like my job was to make sure I got the facts straight and then to make sure that I really believed my opinion, that it really was my opinion. And once I did that, I didn't feel like I needed to engage with people in debates about it. That wasn't my job. My job was to say, I'm getting the facts right, here's what I think, you can read this stuff or not, and then argue amongst yourselves, but I'm not engaging in that. I mean, it was really enough to write the column.
Speaking of chicken skin, which was a key part of your grandmother's chopped liver recipe, what currently is your favorite source of animal protein?
That's a really hard question. I was at this dinner the other night, and this sort of famous food guy, who I guess, just because I'm nice, I'm not going to say who he was.
His initials would be fine.
He said, he was talking about sustainability and what a great job the Obama administration had done about this kind of stuff, and he said, and we were in, I don't know, Peru or Chile or a major South American country, serving this dinner to all these world leaders, and we were serving this fish, which if we're not careful, our children are not going to be able to eat. So I was like, wait, you're serving endangered species as an example of what we shouldn't do? And that's why that's a hard question, which is, and it's because my favorite source of animal protein is fish, and I find buying it really, really tricky. And yeah, I know. And my first book was about fish. My first book was called Fish, was published in 1994. And the publisher asked me if I would rewrite the book, do a new edition of the book a few years ago. And I said, I don't think in all good conscience you can even write a book about fish at this point, because not because everybody should stop eating fish, but because it's impossible to keep up with what's endangered and what's not endangered. So you know, my friend Craig used to say we all have our little inconsistencies, and I think that's probably one of mine, because this odd privilege of still being able to eat wild animals, which no one would ever say, well, I'm eating wild chickens. If they exist. I don't even know if they exist. But there is this kind of odd feeling I have that I want this pure, unquestionably organic wild animal when I can get it and can feel unguilty enough to eat it. Yeah.
So is your freezer full of Chilean sea bass?
I have a corner on the market. No, I don't. I don't eat. I do eat animal products, but I don't eat a big piece of anything every night. But when I'm home and I'm cooking, I often stop by the fish store and see what's there.
What about your favorite non-animal source of protein?
Well, I eat a lot of tofu. I do eat a lot of tofu. Tofu skins especially, which are really amazing. Maybe much like chicken skin. Yuba. I'm not kidding. For those of you who think I'm kidding, yuba.
We'll look for the recipes in your next book.
They'll be there.
How about an underappreciated vegetable?
Second time today I've been asked that question. I'm not kidding. And the first, I was going to say cauliflower, and the woman said, we just did that. So I said mushrooms, which are not technically a vegetable, but come on.
Do you think mushrooms are underappreciated?
Well, I don't think cauliflower is really underappreciated either, but it's a sort of made-up question, so what do you want me to do? You know, don't go with the favorites questions either, because we'll get into trouble here.
Well, cross out that one,
right,
and that one.
What was your favorite meal of your life? Yeah.
Well, but along that line, about one of the things you said when we spoke this over the summer was that that 3 of your favorite meals of the last 6 months were the same clam and pasta recipe, because it was simply perfect. It worked for where you were on the Cape in the summer as a 5-ingredient dish.
Do you hear this? I do become obsessed with things. So I'll make something and I'll like it, and then I'll have it 4 more times in the next 2 weeks. And I do remember that conversation. I do remember I was making pasta with clams all the time. So what's the question exactly? What I become obsessed with? Or?
I mean, since moving to California, has that recipe evolved?
No, it's devolved, because the clams out there are not as good as the clams in the Northeast. I was obsessed with, you go into the store, I mean, people say there are no seasons in California, but it's ridiculous. First of all, there are seasons every day because the weather changes so fast, but there is winter, obviously, and in the winter, you have piles and piles of cauliflower, broccoli Romanesco, and then all kinds of leafy greens. And last winter, I was really obsessed with broccoli Romanesco and was eating it 2-3 times a week. Often, it's practically the same recipe as pasta with clams, except using broccoli instead of clams. Garlic, oil, maybe anchovies, chili, like that.
I've got a question from a reader. If you could design what you considered proper food labeling, what would you add to the basic nutritional information to make it easier for consumers to make better decisions? Google.
I will answer this question, but anyone who thinks this is a great question, and I like this question very much, anyone who thinks this is a good question should Google my dream food label. Bittman. Because one of the first stories I did when I became an opinion writer was my dream food label, because it would be so cool. Even though I knew there was no way in hell I would see this in my lifetime, or probably even in my children's lifetime. But we can think of many questions that we might want to ask about food that are like more important than how much calcium there is in a given thing or whatever else is required on these labels. So, of course, many people would like GMO labeling, and that's an interesting thing that could be on a food label. Whether antibiotics was used in the course of raising a given food, this would be meat for the most part, would be an interesting part of the food label. You could have some, I called this foodness, which would sort of rate things based on how close they were to their original food. So frozen corn might get a 5 or even or maybe a 4 on the foodness thing because it's actually corn, whereas cornmeal cornmeal might get a 3, and then sugar pops, puffed corn kernels with sugar all over them might get a 2, and then high fructose corn syrup might get a 0 or maybe a 1 because there's got some relationship to the. And I thought foodness was kind of cool. And then I can't remember what I was calling humaneness, but humaneness should refer to both how any animals that were involved in the production of this food were treated, but then, of course, how any human animals were treated in the course of making this food, that is, workers. I think that was about it, but there might be one or two other. It's a dream, so you could add whatever you want to the label, but there are many things that I think are equally, I mean, nutrition's important. There was some rating for just general consideration of the environment. So when you think about what good food is, you think, well, it has to be nutritious, so we want that on a label. It has to be, or it should be, as green and low impact as it can be. So some combination of poisoning the environment, poisoning the food itself, other environmental impact in general. It has to be, it should be affordable. Well, that doesn't need to be on the label because you can judge that. And then fair, which is what I'm talking about when I say humaneness, and then delicious, which I guess you can judge yourself too. But there are a lot of things you could put on there, and this is worth Googling because we had this design team work really hard on actually producing these labels, and they're kind of cool. I mean, needless to say, this went nowhere, but someday.
But in the absence of a Mark Bittman dream food label, how does someone go about making informed decisions when they can't know about how the agricultural workers were treated? If they are not standing in a farmer's market in front of the farmer saying, well, you raised this land, what did you feed it?
You know, I asked myself that question because it's a smart question. And so I came up with this idea, which was you take your smartphone and you scan the barcode or the whatever you call that weird thing on the product, and you might put in well, the basic idea was we'd crowdsource that information. Like someone might know something about this product because they helped produce it, or someone might be working in a factory that produced, say, Cheerios and might have some sense of what was going on there. So the idea was to crowdsource everything, to have every product have its own little database that was contributed to by consumers, by workers, by anyone who knew anything, a sort of Wikipedia of food labels. And some guy's off there doing it. I mean, it wasn't the kind of work I was going to do. I thought of it and talked to this guy, and maybe he's doing it, maybe he's not, but it's the kind of app that could happen much more quickly than we're going to get FDA to design my dream food label.
You hinted at this earlier, but you've been critical of people, what you saw as people's inordinate focus on avoiding genetically modified food. Why is that? If you could explain that a little more.
Did I hinted
Yes.
it earlier? This is an argument that I have with close friends and people I generally agree with, and I am not going to defend genetically modified. I'm not going to defend genetic engineering because it has yet to be demonstrated that it's really worthwhile. But I'm not particularly afraid of food that's been raised with genetically modified organisms because it hasn't particularly been proved to be harmful either. If you gave me the option of labeling food that contain GMOs, I would say, yeah, let's label them. But I do think that people who campaign about labeling them are spending energy on something that's maybe less important than whether there are antibiotics in food or how much pesticides there are in food or whether workers were enslaved or paid really horribly to produce that food or whether animals were tortured to produce it or whatever. I think it's on the list of concerns, but it's not high on the list of concerns. And I think the fact that it's probably the best known kind of food issue in the country at this point is a shame. I'm going to take one of these waters.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
But I can listen while
Okay. I do have one question that I'd like to ask. This is from Carol Whitaker, who's the director of the Center for Global Health of the School of Public Health here on campus. What's up with gluten-free?
Carol!
Is it a fad? Is there anything good to say about it? Does it do anything for our health or any good for the planet?
Gluten-free is really important if you're gluten intolerant. If you're not gluten intolerant, it probably doesn't matter at all. So I think there are a lot of people who imagine that they're gluten intolerant, and for those people, it's probably a fad. Is that, did I say something?
No, no.
Maybe controversial, but not funny.
Do you care to offer a hint as to the mystery startup that Mark Bittman is a part of now that he's moved to California?
I've dropped so many hints. It's incredible.
Okay, no more hints. Tell us what it is.
I'm doing a startup that will get, hopefully, if it works, get more plant-based food into the hands of more people.
You heard it here first, folks.
No, you heard it here about 14th. I'm not, no, 2 weeks from Monday. Everybody will know. 2 weeks from Sunday, everybody will know. Unless we delay it again, because it was supposed to have launched this past Monday, I believe. So we're stalling.